Hi, I'm Elaine Durbach, and I'm the author of Roundabout. Roundabout is a novel, it's a short novel about a couple who meet as students and then part ways. They fight and they part, and they don't link up until late in their lives, until their 60s. They meet up now and then, but they're involved with other people. There's always something in the way, but the love between them, the chemistry between them is always there. And the book opens, it's not spoiling anything, the book opens with the death of the man. And the story is this woman's attempt to understand what kept them apart for so long and what finally enabled them to come together. Well, I had an encounter, a meetup with an ex-boyfriend back in Cape Town, which is where I come from. He had been the big romance of my student days. We hadn't seen each other in about 40 years. And both being otherwise involved, there was no question of actually getting involved now. We weren't going to have a romance. And it opened up a different level of openness and communication. I felt as if we were able to talk to each other with a new kind of honesty. And it started me thinking. So I started to toy with the idea of a couple who meet up all these years later when they can't actually be together. And then I couldn't bear to do that to my characters. So the characters in the book have a very different path than my friend and I. It was a lot of fun. I did show him the manuscript. And initially, when I told him that he dies in the opening line, he wasn't very interested. I'm not sure why. But then he read the book and he loved it. He didn't see himself in it as much as I saw him in it, but he loved the book. Well, I must say, getting into writing fiction was a total surprise for me. I'd never been interested in writing fiction. I think I tried to do a short story when I was 20. That was about it. I've always been very fact-oriented. I like the idea of being able to evoke real life and to share concrete information with people. And this venture into fiction happened kind of accidentally. I was toying with the idea and somebody gave me this Latin prompt. I think the line is, Nunca dia sine linea, no day without a line. And I just randomly wrote down one line that came to mind while I was watching TV. And then the next day sat down and wrote another line and turned into 2 paragraphs. That was my first attempt at a novel. And it was the most magical, extraordinary experience I'd ever had. I loved it so much. And I found that I was drawing on all the factual stuff, all the encounters with real people that I've had through 40, 45 years of being a journalist. I was able to draw on material that, when you're writing an article, you're bound by the topic, you're bound by the publication. I could draw on everything that I felt I'd learned about people. I've met so many different characters, I've been in a lot of different places. And it was a chance to really draw on all of that. I found it fascinating. And then the character in the book is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. She has a fear of people disappearing, of people vanishing out of your life. Now, that's not true in my life at all. My family came out of Eastern Europe early in the 20th century, long before the wars. But I was drawing off what I had encountered with people while I was writing for the Jewish News. I felt as if I'd been trusted, had sort of been entrusted with the story of people who've been through that kind of experience. I find that's absolutely true. In some ways, you can go for a much deeper truth. And if you don't, I feel as if the falseness really comes up to bite you. You know, there's an inner integrity to reality. You know, obviously, as you're writing, there are times when you're very plugged into that, and times when it's hard to get into. Same as with any kind of rewriting, any kind of writing. But it felt to me as if there was a much greater chance to give a three-dimensional version of the truth. The characters are like that too. You need to go with the truth of the character. You might have a notion of what you want to create, but quite quickly that character, that creation, takes on a life of their own, and they have an inner integrity. And if you violate that, the character becomes false. It doesn't ring true. It's a fascinating feeling. There are times when I felt as if I was just taking dictation. And that doesn't say anything about the quality of the writing. It just seems to be something to do with that mindset that when you let the imagination open up, what comes through. It's fascinating. Very much surprised. I had a very vague notion of where the story was going. And this is actually the third novel that I was writing, and it's held true each time. I call myself a pantser. I'm one of those ones who writes by the seat of my pants. I don't have a clear structure worked out. I just have this feeling about where the story will go. I have no idea how they'll get there or what will actually happen at the end. And in each of well, now it's 4 books because I've written a sequel to Roundabout. Each one I get to the end and it's like, oh, wow, that's what happens. Wow, that's a difficult one. I'm not a very avid reader. Strange thing to say. I used to be in my childhood. My mother was an English teacher. So I grew up in a very literary home and my mother guided my reading. And at 13, I went away to boarding school, went and lived with my grandmother actually. And I became much less of a reader. And then as an adult, I didn't read all that much fiction. And when I started to do my own creative writing, I was very afraid of absorbing a style from somebody else, which is nonsense. I think the more one reads, the better. But I do tend to get very deeply involved in what I read. I don't read before I go to sleep at night because I dream in the mode of the writing. So I tended to avoid all that much fiction reading. But there are people that I love and there are books that I've adored, and they generally are not high drama. They're not dark. They tend to be about real life, a kind of modern Jane Austen, the minutiae of real life, of everyday life. And I think that's what I write. I want it to be kind of like the way I like to draw. I'm not a very practiced artist, but I've always drawn. And I like my drawings to be fairly simple, fairly quick, with small areas of very accurate detail. And that's what I wanted in my writing as well, that you come in close to very, I hope, poignant detail that gives you the feeling of the reality, but it doesn't dwell all that long on detail. It's a quick read. So that's what I like in authors too. I love a book that transports me into a reality that I can recognize. I've just been reading The Illusion of Separateness by Simon Van Boy. Absolutely beautiful story, which also does an arc through time, kind of the way mine does. And he has the most beautiful telling details, the uncliched and yet totally recognizable details. It's what I aspire to. It's what I'd love to be able to do. I was born in Zimbabwe, what was then Southern Rhodesia. We moved when I was 3 to what became Zambia. And then when I was 12, 13, my family moved to Lesotho, also in Southern Africa. I was sent to high school in Cape Town. And Cape Town had always been the place where my family went on holidays. It's where our other branches of the family lived. So Cape Town was my base for a long time. Went away to university and came back to Cape Town when I started working. I got a scholarship from the Cape Town newspaper, the Cape Times, and I was offered a job. I went back to work for them after college. And then I came to the US on a fellowship, the World Press Institute fellowship, based out of St. Paul, Minnesota. And that turned my life in this other direction. Oh, amazing, amazing. You know, I used to have the feeling that one had to look for people who shared a love of writing and reading literature. In this town, I take it for granted that everybody I meet is on that wavelength. There's just an abundance. And quite soon after we came to live here, I had a young child and was sort of fairly isolated at home. And I was introduced to a group of friends whose children were also in preschool, and they were all writers. And we've been friends more or less since then, for 20-something years. Oh, yeah. I love talking about it, which can be dangerous. I know people say that you shouldn't talk too much about them, but it's already at the point where I'm having beta readers, I'm getting feedback. It got written very fast in the middle of the year, the pandemic. I had been working on another book about a teenager, and I got stuck and miserable, couldn't work out how to move forward in it. And I started getting nagged by what had happened to the characters in Roundabout. And a couple of people, 3 or 4 readers, had said to me that they felt bereft at the end of the book. They didn't want to leave the characters. They wondered what had happened to them. And I just suddenly realized that I knew what happened to Sally, the main character. She's lost her lover. She's lost this man who was the love of her life. She doesn't want to move on. And then the thing happens that she would most want. She seems to get him back. He comes back into her life, except, of course, it's not him. And that intrigued me so much that I sat down and I started writing. And it was written, the initial draft was written in about 2 months. And it's how Sally begins to move on, you know, holding on to what she wants to hold on to, but learning how she needs to move on, filling in some of the missing pieces from the first story. And to my amazement, again, this process where the story unfolds itself, there were these loose threads in the first book that led on to the building blocks for the new story. The man who was the initial inspiration for the first book, when he read the manuscript, he said to me, "Oh, I didn't realize that you were preparing for a sequel, that you'd built in these leads." I said, "I never had any intention of writing a sequel. I kind of disapprove of sequels." But her story was there.
Work at all?
Actually, it's interesting. I was scheduled to speak at the library in June, which of course fell away. It did occur to me that it was a wonderful time to write. First of all, life was simpler and more homebound. And I think that some people were reading far more than usual. They had much more time on their hands. So it seemed to me that the demand for literature might actually be increasing. I don't know if you've seen that in the library, whether people have been borrowing more than they did before. But I also know that some people have had a lot of trouble concentrating. I've been that way myself. There've been books that have sat at my bedside for way longer than usual, just having a hard time concentrating. Then with the election and everything going on. But yeah, I did feel that there might actually be a greater appetite for reading. And when I started writing, I had a little trick with myself that I read in one of the countless blogs about writing. I wouldn't reread what I'd written at the time. I wasn't allowed to reread it until the next morning. Always desperately eager to see what I wrote, to see what came through. So I would be eager to sit down and write. And then again, not allowed to reread the new material, eager to sit down and write. And that was the most intense concentration that I've had, since March. It really drew me deep into writing, and it was wonderful. It was like an escape from everything going on outside in the world. A little hard on my husband, because when I get absorbed in it, I don't notice who's walked into the room. I don't notice time passing. It can be hard for other people to be around. Quite a lot of that. I've had to talk myself out of being afraid of the comparison, because I think that I self-published, so it's not as though I'm going through a distant approval process. But in terms of the readers that have come to me, the people who know the first book, the first one is a very simple story in a way. It's very simple with a simple theme. And I think for some people that's its beauty. The second one is a more conventional structure. It's got very clear story threads running through it. It's not as tidy. It's not as neat. It's not as poignant. It's not as much of a tearjerker as the first one. And I'm very aware that there's some people who won't like it as much. I'm already encountering that. There are a couple of my new readers who prefer it, who've enjoyed it because it's got this very strong story structure. And there are a couple of others who do not like it nearly as much as the first one. And I'm having to remind myself over and over again of how many terrific writers out there are sometimes successful and sometimes not. And there are readers who love one book and don't love another. So just trying to move ahead, and I haven't yet put it out into the world. I'm still kind of polishing, still sanding off the corners, that I'm going to get it out there within the next couple of months and then brace myself for the reaction.